looks like everyone's connected to audio, so I'm going to go ahead and start. My name is Corey Solomon. I'm the Director of Growth and Strategy here at Enflux, and I'm excited to be here again with my colleague Dan Thompson, who I said colleagues, but he doesn't work at Enflux, but he actually is the Assistant Director of Faculty Development and Instructional Design at the College of Veterinary Medicine at OSU. And so Dan has been delivering, this is the third workshop of this series. And so today we'll be focused on delivering the AI powered content for your revolutionary remediation. And so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to throw those in the chat and I'll be teeing those up to Dan as he presents today. I'd love for everyone to take a second to introduce yourself if you can and where you're coming from. If you have any specific thoughts or questions, go ahead and throw those in the chat. And I'll share my email and Dan's email in case you would like to get in touch with us afterwards. And so without further ado, Dan.
All right. Thanks, Corey. And yeah, we're colleagues, right? Of course we are.
I mean, yeah, I just didn't want to confuse.
No, I'm not on payroll there, no. And as an Ohio kid, just to clarify, it's Oklahoma State University when Corey said OSU.
I
I,
almost said that. I mean, because, I know how the rivalry might be, but
yeah, and my whole life OSU is Ohio State, so I finally learned to adjust since moving to this part of the world. So anyway, let's get started with how we're going to deliver the AI powered content. So we've talked previously about how to create, identify which content, and I'll kind of get into a couple slides, but how to identify the problematic areas for your students, the AI prompts we talked about last week, and we'll get into some of those this week too. If you missed that, don't worry. And then, and today's all about delivery. So, and we've learned a lot throughout this process on how we deliver this content to make sure we're doing it in a way that is truly positively influencing student outcomes. And we've been able to track that and able to prove that, which has been really great. And then so we've learned some things on what not to do and what to do, and I'll share those insights to the best of my ability today. So for today, just some of the objectives we want to get to. I'd really like all folks to leave here to be able to implement engaging strategies for delivering the AI. The key word there is engaging. We do want to make sure that truly it's and engaging students in a thoughtful way to where they're actually getting these critical thinking reps, or if you're also in a health professions program, these clinical thinking reps. We also want to integrate those AI resources into your curriculum as seamlessly as possible and focus on those improved student outcomes. So you'll see that a lot where we will mention improved student outcomes several times a day, because that's our North Star in education that we're trying to achieve, is to help our students learn and perform better. And then the last two really we can lump together. I do lump them together toward the end of the presentation today. We'll talk about using the data from those interactions and ways to improve our materials and inform future teaching strategy. So, materials obviously are more self-paced modules, asynchronous problem sets we're creating for students, whereas teaching strategies are obviously, how we're engaging students actively live in the classroom. And we'll speak to both of those just a little bit. I do have some examples I'll show today of the different tools as well. And then some of the output that I've done with faculty. So whether you have certain programs that we'll go through today, great. If not, I do have some free options as well. And some of the programs that I'll mention today also have freemium options, which are pretty good for what we're trying to achieve. So don't worry, I'm not trying to spend more of your money, promise. Okay, so let's get to student engagement. First of all, how did we get here? Well, we want to make data-driven decisions. So the beginning of this entire process that we've developed here is all about locating the specific content areas where students need the most help. It's been eye-opening in this post-COVID world where we are having more students struggling in areas that students tended not to struggle with prior to COVID. Obviously, there was a 2-year plus period of time where teaching and learning was just different and weird, and we weren't prepared for it because it happened overnight. So we know that students struggled during that time, but they were still moving through their programs because we weren't really holding them back during that time. So we've been able to use data, in this case, our data dashboards, to identify the content areas where our students are struggling, so that we can remediate those content areas real time in the moment as much as possible. And I'll explain kind of what that real time is for us. For me, I love the student and outcomes dashboard. If you use NFLX, it kind of has an all-in-one, like as far as what you want to see for reporting on your categories or outcomes of student performance. So once you kind of get your filters down in there, know what you need to see, which is pretty simple. Is you're just picking cohort years and student groups and content areas and categories. Once you've selected those, you kind of have this ready-made list showing you where students are struggling. And then we do, as much as possible, we combine that qualitative and quantitative data. So if you were here last week, you may recall we talked about exit tickets a little bit and asking students what specific challenges that they have and where they're struggling with a certain module or unit. We would combine that qualitative data from students and then look at the quantitative data to make sure we kind of found that sweet spot of where students reported struggling with also where they actually are struggling. It's also eye-opening to do that, look at those the data streams, just to really be able to compare student perception versus actual performance. So once we knew where students are struggling, it's time to jump in and start to make our AI generated content. I mentioned this last week, but just quickly, if your go-to materials to create really great AI content, your learning objectives, your teaching materials, which are those different listed resources there, and then the right AI prompts to achieve your goals. And I know that if you're signed up for these, you'll get a PDF of AI prompts that I've developed, either read about or developed personally through my time over the last couple of years and working quite a bit with AI, that we found to be super productive and accurate in creating this content for students. So, okay, 8 minutes to do the recap. All right, not bad. So let's talk about the engaging content delivery. So the rest of the whatever, we're 50 minutes or so that we'll be hanging out today, is really set. I'm almost kind of going to work backwards a little bit today, and I'm going to get directly into kind of showing you the different types of programs that you can use and ways that you can take the data and then turn it into something that's a deliverable. Just some level setting first, as far as these are kind of the guidelines that I like to follow when creating this engaging content. Is this slide, we're going to talk about self-paced materials. We'll talk about obviously live ones in the next slide. So first of all, what my goals? So one, I want it to be something where I can control the way students engage with the content or assessments. And when I say control the way the students engage, I really mean control the pace. So we're going to talk a lot about slide-based delivery. Like, for example, PowerPoint is a slide-based presentation tool. So, I'm using Google Slides right now. It's a slide-based presentation tool. However, if you were to post just a PowerPoint or a PDF or a Word doc or whatever, just a static document like that, for students to go through a question problem set, to go through a case study, you obviously run the risk of students, let's use the case study as the example, of going to the end of the case to look at what the diagnosis and treatment plan is that you have there. So if they were to do that, which I know I'm calling myself out, I probably would have done as a student. I may or may not have been the student that went to the back of the math book back when we had books, and I would look at the answers for the odd questions. So, because I'd already know what those were, and then I'd work through the problem. So when you do that, they're reading that case with those, rose-colored lenses of they think they know what the case is because they already read what it was. So I always call it the kind of like the Jeopardy theorem, where if you're watching the show Jeopardy or any trivia game, and the question comes up on the screen and you're sitting there, if you it's on the tip of your tongue or on the tip of your brain, you can't come up with the answer before the contestant says it. And then after they say it, what does everyone in their house say? You yelp, oh, I knew that. But if you really knew it, you could have recalled it in the moment. So you probably had heard that before. And so we want to avoid that with students where they look at the answers ahead of time. They look at the case diagnosis and treatment plan and go, oh yeah, I know that. Because this isn't a, they've lost that process of being able to self-assess. And obviously that's what we want to have them do throughout this process. As much as possible when creating these content, these engaging tools, we want to provide immediate feedback. It's for student learning to make sure that they are getting immediate feedback on their performance, but then also it's a time saver for you as well, so that you don't have to constantly either field questions about the content or provide additional information at certain intervals. We're going to make these self-paced materials pre-canned with the feedback in them, so they can almost become kind of study materials. We always encourage student self-assessment with this. This is something that have found to be really important. It's kind of like it's all in the marketing, and so we let our students know that they should be self-assessing. We describe to them in orientation what it means to self-assess. I actually have a little slideshow I go through with them and talk about the importance of it and how to do it and when to do it. And so we just kind of recall to that and remind them that they should be checking their performance and identifying the areas within these self-paced modules where they're struggling specifically. Just to, for so we're on the same page with this too. This is not to change student study plan. We're very well aware of their time and bandwidth is already, especially in higher ed and health professions, they're already stretched pretty thin. So our goal with this is not to change their study plan, it's to inform their study plan, which is why the self-assessment is so important. So we make these modules to be anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes max. And some of the remedial ones we'll talk about are, more 10 minutes. If we do like an exam prep item, that might be closer to 20 minutes. But we don't want this to be something intimidating for students to feel like, oh, I don't want to get into that because it's going to take me so long. We want it to be something that they can, feel more encouraged just to flip through and then identify where they're struggling. And then when they are going to hunker down at the coffee shop for 5 hours, they have kind of some direction on where to go with that. Okay. And then for the in-person or learning and student engagement, some goals that we've identified again with like the different tools or in this case, teaching methods that we use. We want to actively engage all students with course content and support that silent student. And what I'm getting at here is, I know if you all are in health professions as well, you probably have large class sizes like we do. Our average is like, I don't know, 108, somewhere in there. So if you were to verbally ask a question to students, you're not, which is a common practice where as you're lecturing and we'll stop and ask a question. The goal is that every student mentally engages with that and thinks about it critically. However, when in a class size that big, we know that you kind of have that set of like rock star students, you're going to call on more than likely. And then, so they're engaged with it, but you're still probably going to have 90, 95 other students that potentially might not even be mentally engaging with that question because they're just waiting for the rockstar student to answer it. And then they're going to hear the answer and they're going to go, oh, cool. Yeah, I got that. But we're not really encouraging the beginning of a long-term retention process there because they're not critically thinking about it. They're just passively being told what the answer is to a question. So we want to, again, engage them all so that even that silent student is still providing an answer and thinking critically. And, we have different ways we can do that. Again, I did some copy and pasting here. If you can't tell, we do want to provide immediate feedback and we do want to encourage that student self-assessment. It's another broken record moment for me, but I do always strongly suggest that. And then finally, this is kind of like a little preview for how we'll end things today, but we want to be able to learn from student performance in the moment to adjust our teaching if we can during that teaching session. If you don't have that flexibility or ability to do so, I know sometimes you're pretty strapped for time within a given lecture period. We also can take that student performance and let it influence the self-paced materials that we generate. So let's get into what those tools are. So obviously I already kind of put down the static things like PDF or PowerPoint because we want to have something engaging for the sake of it's more interesting, and when students are engaged with the content, they're actually physically clicking on something, it keeps them more active. But again, we do want to control that pace so that we're able to provide them, here's some sort of either a case scenario or just an open-ended question, a multiple choice question, and then prompt students to answer those questions, whether it's provide your differential diagnosis list to a multiple choice question about specific item within in a case scenario. And then we want to provide them the correct answer and then the feedback based on that. We do want to force them to answer something in advance before getting to those answers, though, of course, because again, that's where we get them to actually thoughtfully engage and have the chance to self-assess. So let's start with tools. One, ExamSoft. If you use ExamSoft, it's a secure exam platform. But just if you think outside the box a little bit, in and of itself, it is kind of a slide-based delivery tool. Each question has its own individual page, right? So, and if you're not familiar with this, each question has its own individual page, and there's different question types, of course. So, one thing that we've taken to is kind of a hack is you can take an essay question prompt, where as the question writer, you have a pretty large area you can add information. You can type in a case scenario, copy and paste in a case scenario into that question prompt box. So you can actually use it as a moment to deliver. So, and we'll talk about this in other tools like Canvas as well. You can take, anytime there's a question prompt opportunity for us, that's also an opportunity to deliver content actually as well. So whether it's pictures, video, or written text, you can provide a case scenario within that prompt, and then just make the question worth 0 points. And in the prompt, just say, don't feel you can take notes in the answer area, or there's no need to answer anything here. Answer on the following page, and then the following question can be for students to provide, let's say you have an open-ended question about, again, a differential diagnosis list. That can be the next essay question. The question after that can describe what the differential diagnosis should be. So you are able to really use that as a delivery and engaging tool. Just some tips around that with ExamSoft if you are familiar with it. If you choose the non-secure option, which means students would be able to access the rest of their computer, which I highly recommend for something like this, you can't do the immediate review in that way after the students submit the entire file. So you want to build your feedback into the actual assessment itself. And we'll see that a lot too today. And one of the neat things about that too is if you have ExamSoft and it feeds your NFLEX dashboard, then you're able to get more data of student performance on those items. So I mentioned before, we want to be able to assess our process, and we'll talk about that at the end. That's one of the ways to assess the process, is to tag these items and then have that student performance push over to your NFLEX dashboard. And then now you have more data streams to evaluate where students are struggling and if these are helping students perform better. Canvas is the same thing as far as putting content into the actual assessment itself. Also, if you tag to Canvas outcomes, that can also connect to your NFLEX dashboard and provide more information that way. I'm actually going to show you an example of that here in a second, so I'm not going to get too much into Canvas. If you don't have either of those and you want to get into a free, easy to use platform, there's Google Forms. There is a quiz option on Google Forms, and which is pictured here. So if you go into your settings when you create a new Google Form, there's a tab at the top that says make this a quiz, and you actually can have a quiz that grades the fill in the blank, drop down, multiple choice items. But then also you can have feedback that it provides at the end, and we're actually going to preview that in a second as well, but it's easy. And the neat thing about whatever tool you're choosing here is, since the content is generated via AI, and then of course, whether it's you as the content expert, or if you're in a role like I am, where as the faculty development instructional design person, you have a faculty member at your school that vets the content as the content expert, then this is really just an exercise in copy and paste for the most part. So next is Nearpod, which is a slide-based delivery tool. If you haven't used this before, that actually has engagements. If you were with us last week, I talked about myopathies a lot and creating a uh, um, a self-paced module for students as a way to review myopathies. I'm going to show you that here in a moment too. And then other ones that we've used in the past, Kahoot. You can, if you have now, the free version of Kahoot is only excuse me, live in person. If you wanted to do something self-paced with Kahoot, you would want you need the paid version for that. Same with Nearpod. There is a freemium version of that where you can have up to 40 students live at a given time in a live session. So if you were doing an engaging teaching method, which we'll get to a couple of those here in a moment. But if you wanted to have something where you could do the self-paced, that's a paid version. And then finally, Articulate 360 is another one that I don't think I have an example for today. Maybe I can pull one up if we have time at the end. But it also it's an interactive module where you can provide that feedback, which is really key. Of all of these, Articulate is the most aesthetically pleasing as far as like, and the UI of it is how students work through it. It's just kind of sharper, cleaner, and has some really fun interactions like flashcards and some unique ones in there that are really neat. And then I use Slido. That's kind of like my clicker solution. There's turning technologies and Slido and iClicker and there's endless amount of those types of clicker programs that you can use. I tend to not use those as much because I do like to have open-ended questions, both live in person and in the self-paced modules. So that students we do want to have them critically think about the content and not just always doing recall in these. We want these to be something that if they don't know the correct answer, then they actually will be prompted to go look it up as opposed to just, quick recall from a note. Okay. So I kept saying I'm going to show you some stuff. I just have to move my little bar out of the way. All right. Let's get into some of the different tools that we're going to use. Before we get into those tools, I did want to share, and I think you all either have already gotten or will get this prompt sheet that we've created on with different AI prompts that you can just copy and paste and use. For the sake of, I keep saying do a case study. I just want to have the case study prompt that I tend to use that's pretty lengthy and provides a bunch of information, which is really great. For me, I just have my faculty give me the condition block you can see is not filled in. I also, since I'm in vet med, I add a species block for us because that obviously matters quite a bit in veterinary medicine. So just, food for thought. If you are thinking about case development, please work smart, not hard. Feel free to copy and paste this or, make a version of this that works a little bit better for you. Okay, so let's go with, we're going to start with Google Forms because I know I've worked with folks a bunch and we use, we've probably all filled out a ton of Google Forms. Very few of us have probably taken a Google Form quiz. But it is, obviously it's a non-secure way, but all of these are, the self-paced items that we're doing really aren't meant to be high stakes. They're really no stakes. The majority of these, they're not for points, even completion points. They really are study aids that we tell our students, hey, we listen to you. We know where you're struggling. We've looked at data. We know what the difficult topics are for the group. So we've made some additional resources for you to practice, critically thinking about this content. And I mentioned this, I think in the last 2 weeks, but we tend, when we, market it, for lack of a better term, to our students like that, we get about 80 to 85% of our students completing these. When we've done practice exams where we will really take our lecture materials, before I was saying, have your lecture materials and your learning objectives. When we do that, and I'll use this prompt that you see on the screen right now, we will make practice exams that are self-paced, where it's, question, then they get the correct answer, then they get the rationale describing why the correct answer is correct. We'll even tell them, yeah, I have it in here to briefly explain why the other answer options are less correct or incorrect. So we'll even have it, the AI discriminate between the correct answer and incorrect answers for students. We tend to get close to 100% of student engagement with those as preparatory tools for the exam. One neat thing about these practice quizzes, whether it is, and for us, I just, for the sake of disclosure, I use Nearpod, but you could do any of these other tools to do this. We have found that not only has our average score gone up on the exams year over year when we've used these practice exams, but we've also noticed that students start to engage with that content and studying it earlier than they normally would have. Typically they may finish the final prior to yours, and then once they get done with that one, then they'll get into your content. We have noticed, because I can look at the dates that students, and with all these programs, you can do that. You can see the dates when students engage with them. The dates are earlier than what faculty have typically experienced with students engaging with their content study time, which is obviously great for students studying, that they're doing it over time and not just cramming before the exam. So anyway, here's our AI generated assessment. I do like to collect the email address or a name just so we know who's completing it. That's especially great for the case in how to, in the future, if we want to try to improve these processes, we do want to be able to have student performance data to run these evaluations. So you can do multiple choice questions here. This is, one thing to note with Google Forms, if you do want it to not show students the rationale right away, you will want to add a section here. So that's what these little funny little blocks are here. These are sections that I've added, but then I've just added my rationale into a section title. So let's see what this, and then we can also do open-ended questions as well. I just wanted to show you all that example too. So if I click to see what it looks like for student A, we're going to do our email. There's my personal email if anyone wants to email me. And then the student will click the correct answer and click next. And then on their next slide, here's their answer one rationale, where we would then add the AI generated, I missed a D, AI generated rationale, or it's the best possible answer if it was like a short answer question. So there's their immediate feedback. They've answered the question, and now they get their feedback. On the next slide, we can have open-ended questions. So we do always, have something like this where we give students a prompt on as a reminder to self-assess. I told you I was going to keep beating that dead horse, which I'm also told is not a stain I should use in vet med. I gotta get a different one there. But so you can add your short questions here, and then the students can put their answers. And then same, here's another question. And here's my answer. And then I'm going to do next. And then this is just an idea. You can throw in a case study. I just want to show you that here too. If you wanted to have a longer case study, you can put in a ton of information in a Google form. Once students submit this, they can view their score. And when they view their score, you can also see I have the feedback built in here for the open-ended questions. So what we do a lot with the AI is with short answer questions, when we want students to think critically, we do have the short answer question created, and then we provide students with what we call either the most ideal or the best possible answer. And that way they get that feedback right away. That's why we tell them to self-assess in that moment. So here's our feedback for that answer. And then, again, feedback for the next one as well. So they're always able to get the feedback they need in the moment, real time. But again, they have to answer it first before they get to that. Okay. And if there are any questions or comments about these, Corey, about any of the programs, I'm not checking the chat, to be honest, so I don't get distracted. But you can just pop in and feel free to ask. Okay, Moving on to Canvas. If you've used Canvas quizzes, you're familiar with what this page looks like. This is the build page, where I've added a multiple choice question and a short answer. You can see my little essay question here. What I just wanted to show you with this is that just like the other programs I've mentioned, you can put a bunch of content in a prompt if you wanted to have this be a case type scenario. And then if I do my, sorry, I didn't want to do that. If I do my preview, in my student preview, this is how students will see it. They'll see the STEM, and then they can type in their answers, and then we're going to submit. After they submit, one of the tricks with Canvas, you can have a rationale. I just want to show this. You can have a general feedback here for each multiple choice question. You won't get the feedback for a rationale directly on an essay question in Canvas. However, you can, when you're creating your quiz, do general feedback for the entire quiz that students will see upon completion, like I've done here. So you can just build that feedback here to where I have, here's your best possible answers for the open-ended questions. Question 2, I would put the STEM in there so they are reminded of what that is, and then copy and paste what the AI generated. Question 5 was this question. Here's the best possible answer, so that you can still get that immediate feedback to them after the fact. And just to note with all these, we let students take these as many times as possible. This is not something where it's just a one and done and like a quiz grade. If they want to go back in, and we'll have some students, they'll look at it 4 or 5 times. Some will do it once, and we'll say won't do it at all. And if, again, this is to inform their study plan. So if it's not part of their study plan, we understand that's okay too. And finally, I wanted to show you this, the Nearpod is a slide-based delivery tool. This is the myopathy review that we did last week. This is actual AI generated content that we made for our students. And so what the process of this is, slide 1 is we have the case scenario. Students actually won't see this block on the bottom like this in their preview. And then we have a block of 5 multiple choice questions where they would answer and go to the next one. And then we have our answers, the answer rationales provided within that little 5-question block. We then have our open-ended questions where students would answer here, and then the next page is that answer explanation, and then so forth and so on. And then let's see, I'm going to skip to the end here. And then we would work in multiple choice questions, as you can see along the way. So we'd have other quizzes. So what we did was for each case scenario that we had, we would give some open-ended questions and some multiple choice questions to assess students. As much as possible, like with these open-ended questions, as you can see, we are prompting students again. We want them to apply the information, because we obviously want them to think at a higher level, especially in health professions education. And then what we do, we very specifically pick the multiple choice questions that we use to ensure that they are reinforcing the important points from the case, just to make sure students were pulling out the most important information from the case. So in that level of reinforcement is helping them to practice those critical thinking reps over and over again based on our content. And these, again, are all areas where, when using these different delivery tools to create our our student engagement modules, that students again were performing better on exams when they used these as tools. Let's go back to our slideshow. Okay, so I know that was a lot all at once. I've mentioned this before. Corey said this at the beginning. If you do have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email if you want to chat after the fact. If you have specific tools at your program at your disposal, and you either are unsure on how to use them or haven't used them before, but again, know you have access, feel free to ping me on that too, even if it wasn't on that list, because there's plenty of tools that I work with that I haven't, we just didn't put on that list for the sake of, we only have an hour and I don't have you for 4 hours. Okay. So obviously this is all about improving student outcomes. And I've mentioned the self-paced, I've mentioned engaging students in person. Some of these are more practical easy for me to say, practical examples of how we've done this and how we're continuing to do this. So again, the focus here is to improve student performance on summative exams. That's how, for our sake, how we can track, that if these are actually working. So things that we've made, I mentioned practice exams. I'm sorry, I'm going to give you whiplash and go back, change my screen again. This prompt is the prompt that I use to make my practice exams. I give it the whether it's a PowerPoint, a scholarly article, a PDF, whatever content, a video transcript, whatever content you want to use to make sure that it's creating questions with the exact content how you want it, and it more often than not in the way that the phraseology, the terms that you use for your lectures and in your course, then that's the way to do it, is to give it the information to make those practice questions. So the practice exams, we've worked just exactly how I showed you on the in some of those examples there. The big thing with those practice exams is to build in the rationale in some way, shape, or form. I do like it as much as possible as to have the rationale after each question, so it's fresh in their mind, as opposed to doing a whole entire assessment and then looking at all the rationales. I just think it's a little bit more topical for them to have it be immediately provided after each question. We do use these as well. I mentioned this last week as a way, this AI generated content as a way to activate prior knowledge before a lecture even starts. So to get students, basically we create questions that are, students need to know this information before they're going to be able to understand what class is going to be about that day. So you ask, for the most part, so it's the prereq information. For the most part, students should do well, but you'll notice you might have 85 to 90% correct on those questions. That forever and ever we've assumed students know that because it's prereq information. So that this helps that 10 to 15% that is going to fall even further behind, to catch them up real time in the moment on certain terms or concepts. You can do that as a self-paced module, or like Google Forms quiz, ExamSoft quiz, Nearpod quiz, whatever, in advance, or you can lead off class with that. That's all obviously dependent on your time in class. It's funny, I don't know if you noticed, keep looking over here. I actually have a list of 10 activating prior knowledge questions I made right before this this started today, so I keep looking to that as a reference. And I made it with a PowerPoint, just to be topical with that. This is the prompt that I use for, this is at the very bottom of the prompt guide, but this is the prompt I use to create those activating prior knowledge. The ones that have been, the questions that I've gotten that have been the very best and truly working off of the prereqs to activate the prior knowledge are when I do this part where I actually insert the lecture topics that they've previously had in that course. It just, or if the lecture topics from previous courses that feed in to your course, that's been really helpful, because then the AI will focus on those topics when it's preparing the students for your topics. It's been super helpful. It doesn't mean the ones without it aren't good. They're just a little bit better that way. Okay. See how many times I can give you whiplash between going between tabs here. Next is the application review exercises, including open-ended questions. That myopathies example is probably the best example I can show of that. Just remember application, and that the students will get something out of those open-ended questions. Just in case you're wondering, when I mentioned before that about 80 to 85% of our students complete these, of the open-ended questions that we provide, I would say 2/3 to 3/3 of our, or 3/4 of our, 2/3 to 3/4 of our students complete the questions by actually entering an answer. Like, they give it the old college try, and they don't just put a bunch of jargon like I did in the example just to see what the correct answer is. So I really need to do an analysis on this, but I'm hoping that that's because we do so much instruct them to self-assess and take it seriously. Quizzes, obviously, all the programs that we talked about before, are great to do the quizzes. One kind of bonus in all this, because we the Nearpods and the Slidos and Google Forms and Articulate, you can kind of have almost like observational data from that, and then you'll get percent correct on the questions. Like I know for Nearpod you will. If you use ExamSoft and Canvas and tag your items, and when you do these quizzes or these activating prior knowledge, that's going to continue to collect the data and inform your dashboard better. So when you do go back, and this is a big cyclical process, right? So when you go back and look at your dashboards on where students are struggling or how to improve student performance, you're going to continue to kind of like, feed this data beast of all the information that you need to make decisions in your classroom to truly make it data driven and not just observational data or qualitative data. So if you want those quantitative numbers, you're best served a lot to do these quizzes or those activating prior knowledge items truly in with Canvas outcomes or ExamSoft tagging to continue to tabulate that data. I know that's saved me time in doing it that way as far as our next data review, as opposed to having to export something out and do some manual work, because that's a lot of time put in there. You can do in-class discussion questions as well with this. So I know a lot of what I've talked about today has been asynchronous. And I mentioned kind of engaging that silent student. This is where we use AI a bit to help us with discussion questions. Even, most of you already know them, what you would use in your teaching. If you want to pre-plan them, in that last, I'm going back to it, sorry, everyone. I do ask them for 5 discussion prompts. I use the term online discussion board. I just noticed that was giving me better prompts to use. But I use those prompts as open-ended questions for students to discuss in class. But again, if you have a tool where students can enter answers, it makes sure everybody's engaging with the content. So it isn't just the verbal, that you shouted out to everyone and the rock star students answer. This is truly in this open-ended question box, you're going to type it and answer and hit submit, so that as faculty, like, you can actually see the students come in, or the answers come in real time from all of your students, and then you get to feel again real time in that moment how they're understanding and able to explain that topic. So there's a lot of power in that. That if you're interested in any of that real time content delivery with those open-ended questions and how to get the information back on that, just feel free to shoot me a message after, and we can chat about that. And then finally, case studies. Case studies work great for preclinical and clinical courses. For our clinical rotations, I work with faculty quite a bit on creating what we really have, these repository of cases. So if you work in clinical education, you know that during a rotation time, you can be at the mercy of what patients present to your clinic during that time, as far as what students are seeing and learning on that rotation. My example often is in human medicine. If I'm doing like a family med rotation, right now, if I'm in that rotation, I'm seeing a lot of, oh gosh, what are you seeing? Cold, flu, RSV. I think walking pneumonia is a thing these days. COVID, of course. Whereas if you have students in your August rotation, I'm guessing, going to see more, maybe like heat exhaustion, back to school physicals, things like that. So it's the same rotation, vastly different patients are presenting during that time. So we can make cases for us in breakneck speed. I had a faculty member email me 8 species and conditions this morning, and I had them created in, well, about 8 minutes, as fast as I can copy and paste. So, and now, she's vetting those, and then we'll turn those into something that students can practice with in the rotation. All right. Finally, we want to assess our assessments, and holy cow, this is a lot of content today. We're going to finish on time and have time for questions and everything. So when we do want to, everything that we are doing in the classroom, we try as much as possible to evaluate them, in both as far as reflecting, looking at student evals, and then also taking a data dive to see how it's actually helping students to perform. So first and foremost, I mentioned this a little bit on the last slide, tag your questions so that even if there are these low stakes quiz questions that you're having students do, whether it's in class, out of class, secure, non-secure, working in a group, working as individuals, when you're tagging your questions and to either exam categories or Canvas outcomes, you're helping to again push better and just frequently updated data to your NFLX dashboard. So then you have that one-stop shop to go look and see not only how have students performed in the past, but how are they performing over time. As you can see there, I'm a big fan of the students and outcomes and group comparison so that I can see how students are performing, not just in my current semester, but I can take a quick peek to see how they've performed in the past. And then, of course, we always have notes on how we've taught. So the content, so we know as a comparison what types of teaching methods are working best for us. As you see, my little screenshot at the bottom there is exactly that, where I always love that group comparison tab, because then you can see, I have that class of 23 to 25, so I can see that change over time. So the data, that's like as far as making quick, easy decisions, having that data ready-made is the really the easiest part for us as decision makers. Other things to consider as far as ways to evaluate this AI generated content, talk about low hanging fruit. How many students use the materials? Any of even the free things that we showed today, whether I showed them or had them listed in, all of those programs will give you the number of students that have engaged with it. So, and timestamp when. So it's bare bones, if it's even being used. That's obviously step one. If we're going to go through the trouble of looking at the data, making the prompts, and then delivering it, we want to make sure it's at least getting some use out of it. You could also look, obviously, at which students use these materials. One of the things that I've been doing this week, and we have 1 week after break before the semester starts, that we'll be looking at is specifically the groups of students that have used his materials versus the groups of students that have not. And just so if we can find some trends in how these modules and materials are helping students to perform on their exams. Last couple bits here. If you are in a clinical rotation, we do a lot of pre-test, post-test as well. So we'll do a pre-test at the beginning using one of the programs that you've used. For the sake, again, to have the data how I want it, I tend to use ExamSoft because I have those tagged and then it goes to my dashboard. But we will do a pre-test at the very beginning, and then the post-test is the same assessment. It's just we tend to have some kind of survey items in there as well, asking students about their confidence in performing certain tasks or procedures in their rotation. But when we do those pre-test, post-test, we're also, it's a way of us evaluating the AI generated cases that we've done. So I mentioned on the last slide, we create a lot of self-paced case studies for students to get critical clinical thinking reps. So if there is that downtime at the clinic, if they are struggling with if they aren't able to, answer questions when, the attending's asking them certain questions about, patient care, they're able to practice getting more reps with those self-paced cases and not just going to, read an article or something like, or review old PowerPoints from the preclinical curriculum. So we use these pre-test, post-test again as a way to evaluate if those cases are helping students to perform at least better as far as understanding how to clinically apply the information. And that's why we do more. All of the questions in those are going to be application or open-ended questions, obviously, in that level of their education. And then finally, it's we always do look at student feedback, not just in evaluations. We also, just discuss these with students when we can, to see as much as possible how much feedback we can get. We're fortunate our students are pretty straightforward with us, and we would like to work collaboratively with them in understanding why something could have been better or why something was helpful, and then we can continue to hone that. Just because, if you haven't guessed by now, I am kind of a data nerd. When I do get that student feedback or look at how many students or any of these qualitative things, I always take notes on that and then go look to match that with the quantitative data, just to make sure that the data is backing up what we're hearing from our students. All right, so we're going to bring together the last 3-4 weeks in 5 bullet points, well, like 7 bullet points here. So over the past few weeks. If you've watched either been here or watched the previous recordings, or if you haven't, hopefully you'll go back and check some of the previous ones out. We do want to set goals for our process. So always really big on before we get into why you're looking at the data, why you're thinking about using AI to generate content, what are your goals with it? And when you can be specific, it's great. Ours started out with helping students to improve their outcomes real time in this semester and not waiting until after the semester to improve the course. And then we got more specific from there. Once you know your goals, then you know what data to look at, what uh, data points to evaluate, what dashboards to look at. And so we we of course want to identify where do students need the most help support as the overall cohort, and then how we should instruct the students. So what types of learning materials are helping students to do better on the exams? I'll give you an example. We have nuanced this out to where when we do open-ended questions live in the classroom where students have to type in some sort of answer and submit it, that has um, been pretty clear in showing that when we engage students like that, as opposed to just verbally prompting them or just using multiple choice, that when we've tagged those teaching methods to our assessment items, and that having students type in an answer and think critically in class is helping to start that retention process, and that long-term memory process, a little bit better than the others. So I probably said open-ended or short answer 600 times today. Um, After you know how you're going to instruct them, what works best for your students, that's when we create the AI content. Don't worry, I'm not going to hit escape and go back to my prompt list. We've seen that enough, and hopefully you have that by now. And after you have your content created, we want to find the right deliverables. Obviously, I went through a bunch today. Again, my email address is coming up on the next slide. Feel free to chat with me if you want to find the right deliverable for your program and your specific teaching style. And then once you're going through all this process, you do want to set yourself up to evaluate the process so we can have this continued quality improvement. So whether that's tagging questions, having specific eval items for students to answer, we do want to make this, complete this loop to where you can go back in and look at the data again and help further evaluate what you're doing, how students are performing, and then how to hopefully it's done really well and you can replicate it. And if not, then it's time to make another change or make different types of materials. Anyway, we are done for the day. So if you have any questions, again, Corey, I didn't look in the chat at all, or if you have any questions specifically for me as well, Corey, that's great. I'm happy to be quiet and see if you have anything. And if not, there's a couple email addresses you can reach out to both of us at.
I don't see any specific questions, Dan, so you clearly covered everything so nicely. So
That's what we assume, right?
right,
Uh,
exactly, exactly. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Dan, as always. And if anyone needs anything, our emails are in the chat. And otherwise, I hope all of you have a wonderful holiday. Thank you so much.
yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye.